The pantheon of American gangsters is largely defined by men of brutal force and public bravado. Al Capone, with his iconic scar and menacing presence, embodies the quintessential mob boss. But within the Chicago outfit, a different kind of figure rose through the ranks, a man who preferred negotiation over bloodshed and legal loopholes over machine gun fire. His name was Llewellyn Morris Humphreys. Welcome back to James on the Mob. I'm James Jenkins, host and narrator. Today, we turn the lens on a man who never sought the spotlight, but without him, the Chicago outfit might have collapsed under its own violence. He was the author of many political fixes, including the wrongful jailing of a rival on kidnapping charges, the early release of those involved in the Hollywood extortion conviction, and is given credit as the man who introduced the famous "I take the Fifth Amendment" defense to the mob world. This is the story of the man who would come to be known by a host of aliases, from the Camel and the Hump to the more telling Mr. Einstein and the Brainy Hood. He was the outfit's most ruthless gentleman. The story of Murray Humphreys begins not with gangland violence, but with a classic immigrant struggle for survival. He was born Llewellyn Morris Humphreys on April 20th, 1899 in Chicago, Illinois. His parents, William and Brian Humphreys and Anna Wigley, were dirt-poor Welsh immigrants who had left their small village of Carno near Newtown in Wales in the 1890s in search of a better life in America. They settled in a working-class neighborhood on Chicago's North Clark Street, a location that would later gain a chilling notoriety as the site of the St. Valentine's Day Massacre. The Humphreys family's pursuit of the American dream quickly soured. The harsh realities of their new life forced an early end to young Llewellyn's formal education. At the age of just 7, his father lost his job, and the responsibility of helping to support the family fell upon the child. He was forced to drop out of school, and as a result, began a tumultuous journey into the underworld, selling newspapers on the unforgiving streets of Chicago. His early foray into petty crime was not born of innate desire for violence, but rather from systemic hardship and a desperate need to survive. This early exposure to the unforgiving streets of the Windy City served as his true education, a brutal form of street-level problem-solving that would form the foundation for his later criminal enterprises. A pivotal moment in Humphrey's life occurred at the age of 13, a turning point that would forever alter the trajectory of his criminal career. Already a juvenile delinquent engaged in petty theft, he was arrested and taken into the custody of a local Chicago judge named Jack Murray. In a development that defied all expectations, Judge Murray did not simply punish the young offender. Instead, he saw something in Llewellyn's brilliance, a potential that was being squandered on the streets. The judge took a paternalistic interest in the boy, encouraging him to read law books and maybe become a lawyer. This seemingly simple act of mentorship planted an intellectual seed in Humphrey's mind. While he never pursued a legitimate career in law, he took the judge's advice to heart, although in a most unexpected way. For the rest of his life, he buried himself in all the big, thick law textbooks, just looking for loopholes, obviously. The lessons he learned from the legal text proved to be invaluable, shaping his understanding of the legal system and providing him with knowledge that he would later use to circumvent it for his criminal endeavors. The profound impact of this encounter is underscored by Humphrey's decision to formally change his name from Llewellyn Morris to Murray, in honor of the judge who saw something in him that no one else had. This was more than just a new alias. It was a symbolic rejection of his past and a full embrace of a new intellectually driven identity. A benevolent attempt to guide a young man onto the right path that, through a dark twist of fate, created one of the most brilliant and effective criminal minds in American history. The very tools meant to uphold justice became the instruments for undermining it. Following his encounter with Judge Murray, Humphreys' criminal activities intensified, though they remained centered on his intellectual approach. His teenage years were marked by involvement in several jewel thefts and burglaries. At age 16, he was arrested for felony burglary, a charge that would have carried a much stiffer sentence than a typical juvenile offense. It was during this incident that he provided an early masterclass in his command of the legal system and his mastery of the leverage. He approached the prosecutor with a cunning ultimatum, demonstrating an understanding of legal vulnerabilities and human nature. He told the prosecutor that if he were to be indicted for burglary, he would weep in front of the grand jury, knowing that his youth would likely sway them against an indictment. The trial would be long and messy, and if he were convicted, the do-gooders will say that because of my extreme youth, I ought not be sent to prison. Humphreys offered a better alternative for both of them. If you reduce the charge to one of petty larceny, I'll plead guilty. I'll get a light sentence. You will get a conviction that looks good on your record. Everybody will be happy. And what's more, you'll receive a suitable gift before the case goes to court. The prosecutor, swayed by this shrewd negotiation, reduced the charge, and Humphreys served a mere 60-day sentence in Bridewell jail. This incident solidified his core belief that intellect and corruption were more effective than brute force. It was the direct, practical application of Judge Murray's guidance. This philosophy became a cornerstone of his career and was encapsulated in Humphreys' famous maxim: the difference between guilt and innocence in any court is who gets to the judge first with the most. His approach to violence also reflected this strategic, cold-blooded logic. He was known for believing in killing only as a last resort, preferring instead to use negotiation and bribery. In 1921, after a brief, failed attempt at going straight, Humphreys was pulled back into a life of crime. He partnered with a fellow criminal named Fred Evans to break into the lucrative business of bootlegging. Lacking their own source of product, they opted for the most dangerous solution imaginable: hijacking other people's liquor shipments. All went well for several months until they made a fatal mistake. They hijacked a shipment of bootleg liquor that belonged to the powerful mob of Al Capone. The truck driver identified Humphreys as the hijacker, and it wasn't long before Capone's men captured him and brought him before Scarface himself. This was a situation where death was the typical, if not guaranteed, outcome. Humphreys' life was hanging by a thread, and his only hope was the sharp mind that had been honed by Judge Murray's advice and years of street-level application. The scene was set for what should have been a grim ending for Murray Humphreys. He was brought before Al Capone, a man infamous for his brutal reprisals. While the exact conversation that passed between the two is not known, Humphreys' life was spared. Instead of ordering a hit, Capone was impressed by the young man's smooth-talking and knowledgeable demeanor. He saw that Humphreys was not a simple brute, but a new breed of racketeer, part thug and part businessman. Capone recognized Humphreys' unique value and offered him a position within the Chicago outfit. This decision marked Humphreys' formal entry into the upper echelons of organized crime, a professional turning point that was a direct result of the intellectual groundwork laid by Judge Murray. Capone's famous quotes about Humphreys, "Anybody can use a gun, but the hump uses his head, and nobody hustles like the hump," serve as the ultimate validation of Humphreys' approach. His intellect had become his currency, and Capone, a man who valued power and efficiency above all else, saw its immense potential. This encounter proved that the intellectual path was not just a means of survival, it was the quickest way to the top. Humphreys' rise within the Chicago outfit was swift and strategic. At the age of 27, he was immediately placed in the racketeering side of the business, a position that allowed him to fully utilize his intellectual prowess. While he carried out some killings for the mob around this time, his primary value was not as a gunman, but as a schemer and strategist. His strategic genius was never more evident than in his role in the St. Valentine's Day Massacre in 1929. Though some sources suggest he was one of the gunmen, most accounts confirm that he was a planner and an orchestrator behind the scenes, reinforcing his position as a man who guided violence rather than executed it himself. The chilling irony that this brutal massacre took place on North Clark Street, the same street where Humphreys was born, highlights how deeply intertwined his life was with the history of Chicago crime. Beyond the targeted violence, Humphreys quickly demonstrated his long-range vision for the Chicago outfit's future. From the late 1920s to the early 1930s, he was instrumental in orchestrating the mob's takeover of numerous labor unions. This was a forward-thinking pivot that proved to be a masterstroke. With prohibition in decline, the outfit needed a new source of stable, lucrative income to replace bootlegging. By securing control of labor unions, Humphreys ensured the outfit's long-term survival, transitioning it from a transient bootlegging gang into a permanent institutionalized criminal enterprise with a finger in almost every pie from trade unions to banking, and even had sway over newspaper editors. His success in this endeavor earned him a formidable reputation, with one state investigator describing him as the czar of business rackets in Chicago. With Al Capone's imprisonment for tax evasion in 1931, Murray Humphreys became a key member of the Chicago outfit's senior management. Humphreys' most significant contribution to organized crime was his ability to outsmart the legal system he had studied so diligently in his youth. He is widely credited with discovering and exploiting the intricacies of the U.S. Constitution's Fifth Amendment for the mob's benefit. This strategy, which became a staple of gangster defense, allowed mobsters to refuse to testify by citing their right against self-incrimination. He was also a master of fixing difficult situations to keep his fellow mobsters out of the public eye. His clever schemes included the fake kidnapping of Jake the Barber Factor. In 1933, as British con artist John Jake the Barber Factor, brother of cosmetics mogul Max Factor, was facing and fighting extradition back to England, Humphreys likely orchestrated his fake kidnapping. The scheme framed outfit rival Roger Terrible Toohey, who was then sentenced to 99 years in prison. And 3 weeks after being released in 1959, Toohey was shotgunned to death on Chicago's west side. The disposal of Jake Guzik's body. When longtime outfit member Jake Greasy Thumb Guzik died of a heart attack in a restaurant in 1956, Humphreys had his body discreetly removed and taken to his home, where his widow was told that's where he died. This swift action prevented police from investigating the crime scene and using it as a pretext to round up outfit members, and to keep the media from having a field day speculating on Guzik's death. Securing a Supreme Court nomination. Humphreys had so much leverage over politicians that he was reportedly able to ensure a U.S. Supreme Court nomination for Attorney General Tom Clark in 1949 in exchange for the parole of the mobsters jailed in the infamous 1943 Chicago outfit Hollywood extortion trial. Despite his ruthless criminal mind, Humphreys led a second life that was a stark contrast to his persona in Chicago. As one observer put it, he was like Clark Kent and Superman, a sophisticated mobster in Chicago and a quiet, beloved figure in his other home in Oklahoma. He had married Mary Clementine, or Clemmy, Brendel in 1921, a brilliant woman with a photographic memory who even served as his accountant. The couple and their daughter Luella lived in a handsome, though unostentatious stone and brick house in rural Norman, Oklahoma, an escape from the high-pressure world of Chicago. In this private life, he was known for his generosity. He passed out silver dollars to those in need and gathered up turkeys at Thanksgiving to distribute to Native American families, for whom he had a real fondness. The stories of his life in Oklahoma often seem to blur the line between gangster and gentleman. On one occasion, he reportedly organized a date for his daughter's high school prom with none other than Frank Sinatra. Although he and Clemmy divorced at some point, they remained close friends, and he continued to visit her at the Oklahoma home, even after he had remarried a much younger woman. In the late 1950s, Humphreys became a prime target for the FBI. Director J. Edgar Hoover described him as perhaps the most brilliant mob mind in Chicago, and launched a top hoodlum program to bring him and other mob leaders to justice. In 1957, the FBI bugged Solano's Tailor Shop, the outfit's unofficial headquarters at 620 North Michigan Avenue. The FBI agents who watched from an artist studio across the street were privy to daily meetings between Humphreys and other top figures like Gus Alex and Sam Giancana. And in a moment of audacious humor that perfectly captured his persona, Humphreys would often begin his day by speaking into the bug saying, "Good morning, gentlemen, and anyone else listening. This is the 9 o'clock meeting of the Chicago underworld." In 1965, Chicago boss Sam Giancana was jailed by a federal judge for his refusal to answer questions regarding the syndicate's activities. The judge had blocked Giancana's plan to plead the Fifth by announcing at the start of the hearing that Giancana would be granted automatic immunity for anything self-incriminating the gang boss might reveal in his testimony. When Giancana refused to say anything, he He was charged with contempt of court and sentenced to be jailed for the duration of the grand jury or until he chose to answer. 3 weeks after Giancana's arrest, Humphreys was issued a subpoena to appear before the same grand jury. Humphreys decided to skip town and go to Oklahoma to avoid being served that subpoena. But Humphreys was met by federal agents in Norman who escorted him back to Chicago. The railroad employee who had sold Humphreys his ticket remembered what Humphreys had been wearing, and a porter recalled to FBI agents how, while on the train, Humphreys had been reading a newspaper which he eventually threw aside. Picking up the paper, the porter had been surprised to see the reader's face, displayed on page 1, accompanied by an article about his being sought by a grand jury for questioning. Humphrey's subsequent testimony to the grand jury that he had not known about the subpoena when he left the state was thereby disproved, and 3 agents were sent to arrest Humphreys on a charge of perjury. On November 23, 1965, 3 FBI agents arrived at Humphreys' Marina City apartment in Chicago with a warrant for perjury. Humphreys opened the door, pointing a .38 caliber revolver at them, leading one agent to plead, "Murray, for Christ's sake, you know we're FBI agents, put the gun down." He was apprehended and taken to jail, but he was quickly bailed out by a friend. Later that same evening, at the age of 66, Murray Humphreys was found dead from a fatal heart attack while vacuuming his apartment. The end of his life was as paradoxical as his career. FBI agent William Romer, who had followed Humphreys' activities for years, later admitted that he had developed an affinity for the Hump, more so by far than anyone else in the mob. The agent even chose not to be involved in the final arrest, instead expressing his respects to Humphreys' grieving family. So goes the story of Murray Humphreys. The fact that Humphreys' life ended not in a hail of bullets like so many of his contemporaries, but with a quiet, mundane heart attack while doing a mundane task, was a fittingly anticlimactic end for a mobster who used his brain as his weapon. And his ultimate victory was that he never had to stand trial for his most spectacular of crimes. One more point before I sign off. Humphrey's nickname, the Camel, came from his affinity to wearing camel hair coats, which led to another name, the Hump. The one I liked best was Einstein. And in the comments below, let me know what you thought about Murray Humphreys. I'm James Jenkins. If you enjoyed this episode, hit that like button, subscribe, and share. And be on the lookout for another episode of James on the Mob. And remember, life is short, so don't whack it off. See yous.